You're late." The words hit the air before I even had a chance to set down my bag. I exhaled slowly, gripping the strap of my duffel a little tighter. The house smelled like bleach, like surfaces scrubbed too clean, like an attempt to cover something up. "My train got delayed," I said evenly. A pause. A beat too long. "You should have taken an earlier one," Evelyn said, brushing invisible lint from the sleeve of her cardigan. I unclenched my jaw and stepped inside, the weight of the door clicking shut behind me. It sounded final. "My name is Margot Turner, and for the next 3 weeks, I would be living in my mother-in-law's house." It wasn't where I was supposed to be. I had planned this vacation for months. 3 weeks off. No 20-hour shifts, no emergency calls in the middle of dinner, no patients whose names blurred together by the end of the day. Just time with Ben and the kids, the kind of time that always seemed to slip through our fingers. But then his mother got sick. And now, instead of spending my days on the beach with my family, I was here, standing in the entryway of a house that had never felt like home, staring at a woman who had made it clear from the beginning that I was not her first choice for a daughter-in-law. Evelyn lived here. She had been the one taking care of her mother since the surgery. And from the look she was giving me, I could already tell she didn't want me here. Ben had asked me to come. Just for a few weeks, he had said over the phone, his voice edged with the guilt of asking, "You know how to take care of people, Margot." And I just can't get away right now. So I had said yes. Because that's what you do when you love someone. You show up. Even when you're not wanted. Evelyn finally stepped aside, giving me just enough room to pass. "You can take the guest room," she said. "Mom's resting." Not, "Thanks for coming." Not, "I appreciate the help." Just directions. I nodded, hoisting my bag over my shoulder. "I'll check on her later." Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. "She doesn't need to be disturbed right now." I let the words hang in the air before giving her a tight smile. "Of course." Her eyes flickered over me, assessing, before she turned back toward the kitchen. "And, Margot." I paused in the hallway, already knowing what was coming. "Try not to make things more complicated than they already are." Her tone was light, almost casual. But we both knew it was anything but. The guest room was small, tucked away at the end of the hall. It smelled faintly of lavender, the artificial kind. The bed was neatly made, the blankets perfectly smooth. A single nightstand sat beside it, empty except for a lamp positioned at an exact, purposeful angle. This wasn't a lived-in space. It was a spare place for a temporary guest. I dropped my bag onto the floor and sat down on the edge of the bed, pressing my fingers into my temples. I had offered to come. I had told myself it was the right thing to do. But the weight in my chest told me what I already knew. No matter how much I did here, no matter how hard I tried, it would never be enough. The house was too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that came with peace, but the kind that carried expectation. I had spent the first night in the guest room, lying on my back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of Evelyn moving around the house. She had a way of making even the smallest things sound intentional, the slow creak of the cabinet's opening, the measured clink of a glass being set down, the deliberate snap of the light switch before she finally went to bed. She wasn't loud, but she was making sure I heard her. I knew what it meant. This was her house, her routine, her mother. And I was just passing through. I woke early the next morning, out of habit more than anything. Years of hospital shifts had trained me to rise before the sun. I pulled on a sweater and moved quietly through the hall, pausing outside Anne's room. The door was slightly open. I hesitated for half a second before stepping inside. She was still asleep. Her face was softer in rest, the lines of age and illness temporarily eased. She looked frail, her breathing light but steady. A tray sat on the nightstand beside her, a cup of water, an untouched plate of crackers, and a small collection of pill bottles lined up with Evelyn's careful precision. I frowned. The wrong ones were missing. I knew Anne's prescription regimen. Ben had made sure I did. There were pills she needed in the morning, pills she needed at night. What was gone from the bottle was wrong. Before I could think twice, I reached for the medication chart on the bedside table. It was neatly written, every box carefully checked off. Perfect. Exact. Controlled. And yet wrong. She already took her morning dose. I turned at the voice. Evelyn stood in the doorway, arms crossed, gaze sharp. I didn't flinch. Not all of them, I said, holding up the chart. She's missing her beta blocker. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She doesn't take it in the morning anymore. Her doctor adjusted her schedule last week. I stared at her. Why didn't Ben mention that? Because it's none of his concern. The words landed like a slap, but Evelyn said them so casually, so matter-of-fact, that I wasn't sure she even realized the weight of them. I let out a slow breath, setting the chart back down. I should still be informed, I said evenly. If I'm going to be here, I need to know the full picture. Evelyn tilted her head slightly, watching me the way someone sizes up a weak spot in a wall. You're only here for 3 weeks, she said, voice smooth, calculated. I don't see why you need to be involved in long-term care decisions. My fingers curled into my palms. I'm not here as a tourist, Evelyn. I'm here to help. She let out a short, humorless laugh. Help. There was something bitter in the word, something sharp-edged. You think I need your help, Margot? She shook her head, stepping farther into the room. I've been doing this for months. I know exactly what Mom needs, exactly how to take care of her. She gestured toward the tray. You coming in here and checking my work? It's not helpful. It's insulting. I exhaled slowly. This isn't about you, Evelyn, I said. It's about making sure and gets the right care. Evelyn's lips pressed together in a thin line. I think you should go make yourself some coffee. Dismissal. I knew it when I heard it. I glanced at Anne one last time, still sleeping, oblivious to the conversation happening just feet away, before stepping out of the room. By midday, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Evelyn moved through the house like a shadow, her presence always known, but never acknowledged. I had spent the morning going over Anne's records, familiarizing myself with her new treatment plan. I made my own notes, compared them to what Evelyn had written, and ensured everything matched. I wasn't here to step on toes. I was here to do what Ben had asked me to do. But Evelyn? She was not making it easy. You're hovering, she said, stepping into the kitchen as I was sorting Anne's medication for the next few days. I didn't look up. I'm making sure everything's in order. Her expression didn't shift, but I could feel the annoyance radiating off her. Everything is in order. You're just second-guessing me. I sighed, closing the pill organizer with a firm snap. You're making this a competition, Evelyn. I'm just making sure things are done right. Her fingers tapped once against the counter, a sharp, controlled movement, before she pushed off from where she was leaning. You want to be useful, Margot, she said, turning toward the fridge. You can cook dinner. I let out a short laugh. So now I'm the hired help? She glanced over her shoulder, smiling just a little too sweetly. You're the guest, she said. And guests should contribute. She turned back to the fridge, pulling out a head of lettuce. Mom eats at 6. Don't be late. I wasn't late. At exactly 6 o'clock, I set the meal down in front of Anne, ensuring everything was soft, easy to chew, the right temperature. I checked her water, adjusted the pillow behind her back, and made sure her silverware was positioned so she wouldn't struggle. Evelyn said nothing. She didn't touch the food. She sat at the table, watching, waiting, and took a bite of the soup I had made. And then, a small sound of approval. This is good, she murmured, spoon hovering just above the bowl. It was nothing, just a small comment. A simple acknowledgement. But when I glanced up, Evelyn's expression had hardened. She picked up her fork, set it down, picked it up again, a movement I might have missed if I hadn't been watching. She didn't like this. Not the food. The moment. The fact that I had done something right. That and had noticed. That maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as unnecessary as she wanted me to be. The silence stretched between us, brittle and thin. And I knew in that moment. This was only the beginning. It happened late at night. The house had finally settled into silence, thick and heavy. The kind of silence that makes you feel like you're the only one awake, the only one keeping watch. I had just finished checking Anne's vitals, making sure she was comfortable before heading back to the guest room. It had been a long day, another long day, of Evelyn's subtle jabs, her constant presence, her refusal to let me in while making sure I never forgot that this was her domain. But that didn't matter right now. Because right now, something was wrong. At first, it was just a sound. A faint, wet cough. Then a wheeze. A rasp. And then, a choking sound. I was on my feet before I even registered moving. When I reached Anne's room, my pulse spiked instantly. She was slumped forward, struggling for breath. Her hands clawed weakly at her throat, her eyes wide, desperate. The light from the bedside lamp cast sharp shadows across her face, highlighting the way her chest stuttered, like a car engine trying to turn over but failing. She was going into respiratory distress. I acted without thinking. I had seen this before, in hospitals, in emergency rooms, but never in a setting like this. Never alone. I grabbed her wrist, feeling for a pulse, weak, erratic. And I said, my voice firm but calm, I need you to try to breathe slowly, okay? She couldn't. Her chest was rising too fast, too shallow, her throat rattling as her body fought for oxygen. And then I saw it, the pills. Still sitting on the tray from earlier. Untouched. Her diuretics. The ones she was supposed to take before bed to prevent fluid buildup in her lungs. She hadn't taken them. Evelyn hadn't given them to her. I felt a jolt of adrenaline, cold and sharp. I didn't have time to think about what that meant. I needed to act. I lunged for the oxygen tank beside her bed, hands working on autopilot. Nasal cannula. Flow rate. Positioning. And was gasping, her lips tinged blue. Too long. She's been like this too long. I tilted her forward, checking her airway, trying to determine how bad it was. And then, a voice. A sharp, indignant voice from the doorway. What are you doing? I barely turned. Evelyn, get out. Her footsteps entered the room instead. Why is she on oxygen? Because she can't breathe. I snapped, adjusting the cannula, watching Anne's oxygen saturation levels begin to rise, slowly, too slowly. Evelyn took another step forward. She's fine. She just needs to calm down. I whirled on her, my voice cold, lethal. You forgot to give her the diuretics. A flicker of something crossed Evelyn's face, shock, maybe, or guilt, before it hardened. I didn't forget. Then why the hell are they still sitting on the tray? Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line, her arms folding across her chest. I was going to give them to her. She just fell asleep before I could. I let out a harsh laugh, disbelieving. You were going to? Are you serious? Do you even understand what could have happened tonight? Evelyn's face didn't change. She's fine now. You're overreacting. I stared at her. Overreacting? And had been seconds away from drowning in her own fluids, and Evelyn was standing here, arms crossed, indifferent, as if this was just another minor inconvenience. She wasn't even grateful. Not a single thank you. Not a single acknowledgement. Just defensiveness. Just denial. I turned away before I said something I couldn't take back. Anne was stable now. Her breathing had evened out. She was still weak, exhausted, shaken, but she was alive. Because I had been here. Because I had woken up. I let out a slow breath, standing up from my crouched position beside the bed. And Evelyn? She was still watching me, eyes cold, assessing, waiting. I met her gaze head-on, something solid settling in my chest. And that's when I realized. She wasn't mad because I had messed up. She was mad because I had been right. Because Anne needed me. Because I wasn't as unnecessary as she wanted me to be. I left the room without another word. Evelyn didn't follow. But she didn't need to. Because in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just about Ant anymore. This was about control. About power. About who got to be seen as the one taking care of her. And Evelyn? She would rather let her own mother suffer than admit that someone else had done what she couldn't. I closed the door behind me, my pulse still pounding, my hands still shaking. Somewhere down the hall, a clock ticked, steady, slow, unaffected. As if nothing had happened at all. But something had happened. And I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. I didn't sleep. Even after I left Anne's room, even after I forced myself to sit on the edge of the guest bed and breathe through the frustration, my body refused to settle. Because no matter how many times I ran through the night's events in my head, the same thought kept hammering through my skull. And could have died. And Evelyn didn't care. Not really. Not in the way she should have. She wasn't shaken. She wasn't remorseful. She was angry, but not at herself. At me. Because I was right. Because I had stepped in and done what she was too careless, too proud to do. I stared at the ceiling, my fists curled into the sheets, my jaw aching from how hard I had been clenching it. Something inside me had snapped tonight, and there was no coming back from it. By morning, I had made a decision. I was done playing nice. I didn't care about Evelyn's ego. I didn't care about the power struggle she had built in her head. What I cared about was Anne and the fact that she needed real care. So when I walked into the kitchen the next morning and saw Evelyn standing by the counter, perfectly composed, perfectly collected, like nothing had happened, I didn't hesitate. I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. We need to talk. She barely looked up from her coffee. No, we don't. My patience was already thin. Too thin. Last night, and almost stopped breathing because you didn't give her the medication she needed. And instead of admitting that, you tried to make it my fault. Evelyn stilled, just for a second. Then she sighed, setting her cup down with a quiet clink. I told you, Margot. I was going to give them to her. You didn't. My voice was sharper now, cutting through the air like a blade. And she could have died because of it. Evelyn finally met my gaze, eyes cold. But she didn't. The casualness of it made my blood turn to ice. I leaned forward, my voice low, controlled. Do you even hear yourself? Her jaw tensed. You're acting like I did it on purpose. You didn't have to. I kept my tone even. Steady. Unshakable. Neglect is enough. Her nostrils flared. Neglect? Are you serious? Yes. I didn't waver. Because that's what it was. She scoffed, shaking her head. You're unbelievable. No, Evelyn. I exhaled, forcing my voice to remain calm. What's unbelievable is that you'd rather argue with me than admit you made a mistake. That you'd rather protect your own pride than actually keep your mother safe. Her hand clenched around her coffee mug. She looked like she wanted to throw it. Instead, she set it down and pushed back from the table. Mom is fine, Margot, she said, voice tightly controlled. She's fine because of me. I've been taking care of her since the beginning. I've been here every single day, making sure she is everything she needs. Her voice rose slightly, her carefully built composure cracking. You waltz in here for a few weeks, act like you know everything, and suddenly I'm the villain? You think you care more than I do? You think you're better at this than me? I stood up too, my chair scraping against the tile. I don't care about being better than you, Evelyn. I care about keeping Anne alive. Her lips pressed into a thin line. And you think I don't? I hesitated, just for a second. Because that was the thing. Evelyn did care. She cared so much that it had twisted into something else, something bitter, something stubborn, something that refused to let anyone else in. She had built her entire identity around being the one who took care of their mother. And now I was threatening that. And instead of accepting help, she was pushing me away. She had convinced herself that if she wasn't the one doing everything, then she wasn't doing enough. I let out a slow breath, steadying myself. This isn't a competition, I said, voice softer now. It never was. Evelyn's shoulders were rigid, her face unreadable. But her eyes were saying everything she wouldn't. Because she knew I was right. And she hated it. The tension didn't break. Not that day. Not the next. Evelyn and I settled into a new kind of silence, one thick with resentment, unspoken things hanging between us like a storm cloud. We still moved through the same routines. I still checked Anne's vitals, monitored her medication, made sure she was eating. Evelyn still watched. Still waited. Still kept score. She started double-checking everything I did, rearranging the pillows I had adjusted, redoing the meals I had already prepared, hovering in the doorway whenever I sat with and as if waiting for me to fail. But I didn't. And that was the problem. Because I wasn't going anywhere. And Evelyn? She was starting to realize it. It was Anne who finally broke the silence. I was sitting with her in the living room one afternoon, helping her prop her feet up on the ottoman, when she let out a small sigh. "You and Evelyn are fighting." I froze for half a second before forcing a small smile. "We're just figuring things out." And gave me a look. The kind of look that told me she had seen more than I realized. "She's always been like this, you know," she murmured. "Always needed to be the one in charge." I swallowed, shifting slightly in my seat. "I know." A pause. Then, "She doesn't hate you." I blinked, caught off guard. "I never said she did." Anne's lips curved into something almost wry. "You didn't have to." I exhaled, rubbing a hand over my face. "She just doesn't think she needs me here." And was silent for a long moment. Then, quietly, "She's scared." I looked at her, eyebrows drawing together. Anne's gaze was distant, thoughtful. "She doesn't know what she'll be when I'm gone," she admitted. "She's spent so long taking care of me, I don't think she knows how to do anything else." I swallowed hard. Because for the first time, I saw it. Not just Evelyn's pride. Not just her control. Her fear. Fear of not being needed anymore. Fear of what comes next. I looked down at my hands, my chest tight. Because suddenly, I wasn't so sure what came next either. The house was still. Not in the tense, watchful way it had been before, where every moment felt like a battle waiting to unfold. Not in the way where silence carried unspoken words, bitter and sharp. This silence was different. It was the silence of change. The kind that settles into the bones of a house when something has shifted, when the foundation has been cracked just enough to let light in. I stood in the kitchen, my fingers curled around a warm cup of coffee, staring at the rain tapping against the window pane. It had been 3 weeks. 3 long, exhausting, suffocating weeks. And tomorrow? I was leaving. I had spent the last few days simply doing my job. Not for Evelyn. Not for some sense of winning an argument. For Anne. Because that's why I had come here. Not to prove anything. Not to fight a battle I had never signed up for. I came because Ben had asked me to. I came because Anne needed someone who knew what they were doing. And in the end, that had to be enough. I wasn't sure Evelyn had accepted it. But she had stopped fighting me. She still hovered. Still watched. But the sharpness had dulled, just slightly. The tension between us hadn't disappeared. But it had changed shape. And that was something. The knock came late in the evening. Soft. Tentative. For a second, I thought I had imagined it. Then, another knock. I turned from my suitcase, already halfway packed, and opened the door. Evelyn stood in the hallway, arms crossed, not quite meeting my gaze. She looked different. Not physically, she still had that same perfectly pressed, put-together composure, but there was something in her posture, in her eyes. Something that wasn't defiance. Something closer to uncertainty. I didn't speak first. I had learned, by now, that Evelyn didn't like being forced into things. She had to come to them on her own. And right now, she had. She let out a breath, shifting slightly on her feet. I made tea. A pause. Then, stiffly, as if the words pained her to say, "Do you want some?" I didn't move for a second. Because this was something new. Not much. Not an apology. Not a confession of everything she had done wrong. But a crack in the wall she had built between us. And that? That was enough. I nodded. Yeah, I said quietly. I'd like that. The kitchen was dimly lit, the only light coming from the under-cabinet glow near the stove. Evelyn moved methodically, setting out 2 cups, pouring the tea with the same practiced precision she did everything else. I watched her hands. They were steadier than mine had been lately. She slid a cup toward me, then sat down across the table, fingers curling around her own. The silence stretched, heavy but not uncomfortable. She took a sip, exhaled slowly. Then, "Are you still leaving tomorrow?" I studied her. There was something carefully neutral in the way she said it. Not asking me to stay. Not telling me to go. Just acknowledging it. Yeah, I said. I think it's time. She nodded once, staring down at her tea. Another pause. Then, so quietly I almost missed it. You did a good job. I blinked. I had imagined 100 different endings to this. A final fight. A cold, detached farewell. But not this. Not Evelyn, sitting across from me, admitting something she had spent 3 weeks refusing to say. I took a slow sip of my tea. I wasn't trying to take over, I said finally. She looked up at me. For the first time, I saw the exhaustion in her face. The weight of everything she had carried for so long without help. I know, she murmured. And somehow I believed her. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. There were some things that didn't need to be said out loud to be understood. I finished my tea, rinsed my cup, and went back to my room. And that night, for the first time since I had arrived, I slept. The next morning was quiet. I double-checked everything before I left: Anne's medication, the oxygen levels, the food schedule. Evelyn stood in the hallway as I zipped my suitcase. She wasn't hovering this time. She was just there. I turned, adjusting my bag over my shoulder. Ben's gonna check in a few times a week, I said. If you need anything. I know. She hesitated. Then I'll take care of it. I nodded. Of course she would. She always had. I reached for the door handle. And then, Margot. I glanced back. Evelyn's arms were crossed again, but her expression wasn't defensive this time. Just uncertain. Just tired. She swallowed, as if she wasn't sure how to say what she wanted to say. Then, finally, "Thank you." It was softer than I had ever heard her voice before. And in that moment, I knew what it cost her to say it. My chest tightened, but I just nodded. Take care of yourself, Evelyn. And then, with the kind of finality I hadn't realized I needed, I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and walked away. It wasn't a perfect ending. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. But it was something. A truce at the very least. A crack in the walls we had spent so long building. And sometimes, that was enough.